What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. It is Wednesday, September 30th. We're about to roll into October. I think the 30 days in September, maybe 31. We'll find out tomorrow when it's October, when it's not. I know. Thank you. Excited, of course. It's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's time for a Brady Quinn football show.
By the way, what about Miami 3-0?
Oh, no. Did I not load it correctly?
Got it, guys. No, I'm done. There it is.
No, it didn't load for some reason.
I thought you had the.
I had air horns. I plugged it in.
You had the air horns? Oh.
I had air horns and everything.
Man, maybe next week.
What the hell happened to the air horns? That's not it.
Mathayu. Is he being serious?
For a long time.
No, this is the best one.
Oh, he missed. He missed. Oh, and he may have pulled a hamstring or a muscle, and there is complete elation.
That's when the Randy Bullock missed the kick for the Bengals.
Right.
I changed that sound drop like an hour ago. I'm so disappointed. I don't know what to do with my life now. Oh! I'm putting the wrong one. There it is.
Yes.
It's a Brady Quinn football show.
Oh, that's legit. All right. I'm excited.
I didn't change the label. That's on me. I switched it up.
That's
amazing. You can see these little, if you can see it on pick6.com or youtube.com/pick6. Usually I change the labels on here, and I didn't change it with my Sharpie. So
that's amazing.
Okay. That was a fun intro, Brady. By the way, football season's rolling, full steam ahead, and to celebrate it and to thank you guys for being such loyal listeners, we are giving away, when I say we, I mean the Pick Six Podcast. We are giving away a 65-inch television and a power station. It is completely free to enter. If you listen to this podcast and you want to win a 65-inch television, go to cbssports.com/pick6giveaway. Pick six, Picksix, GIVEAWAY. Pick Six giveaway. Go there. The link's in the bio, the episode description here. You have until October 25th. Go there, do whatever you got to do to enter, and you can win a 65-inch television. Mom, don't do it. You're not eligible. Download, subscribe, rate, and review. You got a question for Brady? You got a question for any one of our many experts, awesome people that come on the show? Do that. Leave a 5-star review. We'll answer it for you. Next week, Brady and I will do quarter season awards, where Brady will claim that I don't know what you'll claim. That Josh Allen is the MVP. That's my prediction. You'll say that.
Probably not.
Probably not. But we're going to dive in on quarterbacks this week. We're going to split it into good and bad quarterbacking, Brady. But first, a topic near and dear to your heart. COVID-19 is affecting the Titans and the Vikings. Both teams have suspended in-person activities after 8 people with the Titans. 3 players and 5 personnel guys tested positive. They're doing contact tracing. They're being removed from the facilities, et cetera, to try and figure it out. How do you think this plays out? And maybe more importantly, assuming they go ahead with the game, as it seems like that is the plan on Sunday, or maybe even push it back to Monday, what do you think, how will that impact the Titans specifically against the Steelers?
Yeah, so their facility's closed down until Saturday at this point, and I think obviously the biggest thing it's going to impact is their ability to prepare. Now, I don't know what they're technically able or allowed to do based on the NFL, the NFLPA's rules for this scenario. Obviously, Mike Vrabel and his staff probably have an idea, but if I was Ryan Tannehill, this is what I would be doing. I'd be getting my wide receivers, my tight ends, my running backs together, my team. I'd be walking through stuff on a high school field. I would find any facility possible where we could go out and at least walk through or go through some routes on air and go through some of the concepts and talk about this sort of thing if we are shut out of the facility until Saturday. So I can promise you this much. They talked about it not being an excuse, and the NFL is going to continue to push forward. So you as a player, you as a coach, you have to do everything you can with the Zoom meetings and then maybe even finding ways to get everyone together outside of what's technically deemed or allowed to prepare yourself, because there's no excuses in the NFL. If they drop this week's game, right, this is a 3-0 football team. If they drop this week's game, no one's going to be crying, next week for them. It's life as usual. We're moving on. So clearly the preparation is going to be the biggest thing. And, when I was thinking about this, Will, it's always funny because as a player, there are times when you have a great week of practice and you go out Sunday and you stink. And then there's times when you have a bad week of practice. You feel terrible going into the game. And then you go out of the game, you ball out. And so I kind of wonder, like in this case where, there's a chance that there might not be much practicing at all going on. How will that ultimately really impact them when it comes Sunday and time to play, right? Like there was that whole study done about the guy who visualized shooting 100 free throws versus the guy who physically practiced shooting the free throws. And they actually ended up, shooting about the same when it was all said and done. So I wonder how much that's going to apply here to the Titans because they're the team that's more impacted by it. Excuse me, the Vikings, they don't have any positive tests from all accounts right now, and it sounds like they only have to shut down their facility until Thursday.
Yeah, and I think that, if you're the Vikings, you get back in there Thursday, you get 3 days of practice. Maybe you crank it up a little bit, and then you go do your work. Plus, I can't imagine it doesn't affect the Titans to some degree. If you're Tennessee, are you saying, all right, let's hunker down and like our game plan is now just going to be to pound the living crap out of the ball? Or is there some different way that you would be approaching it?
I think I'd obviously want to rely on the things that we've been doing successfully. I would really limit in the passing game in particular the amount of new things that we would be interjecting into our game plan, right? Any new concepts, situationally third down, red zone, those things would be tough to be able to implement and then go out there and call it with confidence and be able to execute it with confidence if you're Ryan Tannehill. So, look, I think the good thing for him is, Ryan's played enough football in this league where he'll be able to adjust. There are times when during the game, you literally come over the sidelines and you're like, hey, this ain't working. We got to do something else. And so you're drawing stuff up on the sidelines that you maybe haven't practiced before. So those scenarios sometimes happen. The hard thing is like you're basically talking about potentially an entire, game plan or an entire game that they don't have the opportunity to practice at full speed with one another potentially. Again, we're speculating right now because we don't know. And like I said to you before, Will, if it was me, I'd be doing I'd have him in my backyard. I'd have him doing something maybe out in the street, but I would be having Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, the rest of the group. Like those guys, we'd be getting together and throwing the ball around a little bit and making sure everyone's on the same page.
It seems smart. And are you surprised that the NFL is just forging ahead? Because I'm not at all.
No.
Like this is the NFL. I think the NFL is like if you're doing, so my son Robbie we're doing heavier and lighter in school right now. Like what's heavier, a feather or a rock? And it's like, really? Okay, cool. Kindergarten seems easy. But like competitive balance for the Titans or getting 16 games in. Guess which one weighs more? It's obviously the 16 games. The NFL cares way more about it. I don't think they would put the Titans or the Vikings or anybody in like physical harm's way, but I do think that, they're like, listen, tough, go play.
Well, you could make the case that this is actually allows them to preserve everyone until they get to the game, right? Like no one's going to get injured in practice this week. No one's going to tweak anything in practice. So technically you could probably make the case, at least from the NFLPA standpoint, they're like, hey, we at least know our guys are going to get there Sunday. We just don't know how prepared they're going to be. And look, we've been through a few weeks of games at this point. So I think they probably feel good about, where they're at. I think the biggest thing is, the intensity. Like, are guys mentally going to be able to flip that switch and turn it on come game time? That's one question that you kind of have. When you get along the course of a game week, it's a little bit easier to ramp yourself up and build yourself up for it. You're a creature of habit. You're accustomed to that normal schedule. So then having to not have much practice time and all that, not have that same intensity throughout the course of the week, how does that potentially impact you and just your mindset come Sunday?
Yeah, it's like if you're used to your routine of the NFL season, then 3 weeks in, they're like, hey, you're going to do a show every day at 4:00 that we didn't tell you about until right now, except not on Tuesday sometimes, depending on what happens with the soccer. And you're like, okay, sure. I'm totally prepared for that. That doesn't –
And you're going to host it too. You're going to host it, right?
Right. It's, really my show even. It is true though. Like I think – and I'm not trying to suggest that I'm similar to an NFL athlete in the sense of the routine, but I do think when you cover the NFL, you sort of develop the same rhythmic part of your lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. No, that was one of the things that someone asked me about, hey, what's it been like, becoming a broadcaster and covering the NFL, covering college football? And I said, well, you're still beholden to that NFL schedule. Like if you're trying to plan out your year and your vacation time with your family, or when you have free time, it revolves around the NFL calendar. And so whether it's, during season or during the off season. And that is something that's kind of interesting that like and that's, look, with COVID right now in 2020, everyone's got to be flexible too. Like as much as we're thinking about the players and their inability to practice and prepare, think about the media members there in Tennessee or in Nashville. Think about their preparation, what they're going to talk about. Maybe they'll have the same access. Maybe they won't. Maybe they get to see parts of, whatever they end up doing this week. Maybe they won't. So they're kind of left in the dark. They've got to figure out how they're going to have to go about handling this, writing about this. We're all in the same boat right now in 2020 with COVID.
Okay, I have one more question for you, not related to COVID. You didn't do the halftime show on Saturday. You did the pregame show, but not the halftime show. Somebody asked me about this. I don't know why. I said you probably flew to Arizona. Correct?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I figured.
And reason being is, with the schedule.
LAX, it's a pain in the ass.
No, it's not that actually, even though there was traffic on a Saturday, which was like bizarre considering, I guess maybe a bunch of people were going to the beach. So maybe it's not that bizarre because it does seem like a lot of businesses and everything's kind of shut down there. So maybe it would have been better during the week. But we have a set schedule. Usually the away team we would go then and meet with. So we were actually staying in the same hotel as the Detroit Lions. However, we are separated in our own rooms doing a Zoom call, which is just bizarre when you think about it, considering like Matt Patricia was probably like to the next room over, the next room up from me. We're sitting there talking, via Zoom. But I had to leave at that point in time to be able to get there in time for those Zoom meetings. That's what I figured. That's what I told maybe it was Wilson who asked me. He was like, "Why wasn't Brady on the halftime show?" I was like, he probably had to get to Arizona. He was like, it'll be like that this week too. I'm calling the Seattle at Miami game. So
Seattle at Miami?
Seattle at Miami. So I'm taking the latest flight out so I can be a part of it. But like I've already had to move up the schedule for when we speak with the coaches at Miami and same thing with the Seattle Seahawks.
Little bonus for you that you get to drive home from work on Sunday too.
That is true. It'll be nice. It'll be nice.
Have to actually spend the night with your family on a Sunday. Sounds lovely. Let's take a break. My wife's like, "You gonna come upstairs and tell her good night?" I'm like, "No, it's football game." All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will break down some quarterback play. Okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly. No, we'll just do the good and the bad and sort of break down what you're seeing from tape, from film, from your general the buzz around the league. All that stuff. Let's start with the guy who's the lead. I know the MVP is stupid after 3 weeks. I don't care. Russell Wilson is the MVP 3 weeks in. He's on pace for 74 touchdowns. He's completing almost 80% of his passes, 9 yards per attempt, 1 interception that wasn't even his fault, Greg Olsen, 9 sacks, and I think he has 20 incompletions. I mean, he's been ridiculous. They're letting Russ cook. Is it the analytics community, and I know you're steeped in analytics in terms of your coverage of professional football. They actually, I'm being sarcastic there, in case anybody pick up on it. But a lot of play action early on, a lot of throws on first and second down. Do you think what the Seahawks did is smart, or is it obviously smart? And do you think it's sustainable? What can we see from Russell the rest of the year? What have you seen so far?
Well, there's a number of things at play. People are going to make and try to draw whatever conclusions they can, whether it's via analytics or whatever else. It's a small sample size. So anyone who follows data or analytics, they would tell you right now that, is this sustainable at this pace? Of course not. We've never seen it before. Teams are eventually going to start, playing more pass defense or those sorts of coverages on early downs and really ask or invite the Seattle Seahawks to run, which is kind of what they've always wanted to do. But look, the jump and looking at what he's done the first 3 weeks, I think have something to do with all the parts involved, right? Let's start with the offensive line. I actually think with the exception of when they've suffered a couple injuries, this group has played pretty well. This might be one of the better groups that he's actually had during his time there, which is kind of saying something because some of the offensive lines have been really poor or just a work in progress. When you think about some of the guys who have started and just transitioning them, for example, J.R. Sweezy, who was a college defensive lineman, right, converted into an offensive lineman, it's going to take some while. And now he's a veteran, he's a pro, he's starting for Arizona, doing a great job, but it had taken him some time to get accustomed to it. So when you take all those things into account, this is one of the better groups he's had during his time. DK Metcalf, just his jump and emergence as a wide receiver, he honestly looks like the second coming of T.O. to me. I don't know if you view it as the same, but I think if you look at his body size, just how explosive he is. Those things kind of jump out to me as like, man, this guy really looks similar to T.O. And then you have Lockett, and then you have, Freddie Swain, who I think is in for a big season as he continues to emerge as one of those targets, more obviously as well. But they're tight ends. I mean, the way those tight ends block, the way those tight ends can be a part of the play action, pass, and boot game, they just have everything working for them right now. And so I think it's in part the weapons, the O-line, and then obviously his mastery of the offense. If you break down his tape, and here's an analytics stat for you, like go look at his adjusted completion percentage. He's probably, no matter what the situation may be, it could be a clean pocket, it could be versus pressure or blitz, his adjusted completion percentage is like 80%, 90% in some cases. Like when you watch the tape on him, there's very few footballs that he throws that aren't catchable or at least give his pass catchers an opportunity to get the football. Everyone's gaga about the touchdown passes. I mean, think about it. He should have one more, right? If not for DK Metcalf slowing down across the goal line and Diggs knocking that out, he really should have 15 right now. If you throw in the pick 6 that he threw, maybe it is 16. So bottom line is I think they've got everything working to their favor, but it's somewhat his mastery within the offense. And it's a combination of everything. It's not just play action pass and throwing in early downs. That's always something that I think you try to do, but they've been able to execute it successfully because of the sum of the parts.
So Russell Wilson's expected completion percentage, 67%. His actual completion percentage, 76.7, which is almost 10 percentage points higher than and that the difference there leads the league by far.
His completion percentage versus the blitz is like 67%. He's got 4 touchdowns and no picks. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do against him. He has continually answered the call. I mean, the throw he made, I believe it was to Carson out of the backfield. I want to say it was this past week. I've watched so much film and tape on him at this point. I'm mixing up probably.
Prepping for it, yeah.
But
maybe it might have been the Falcons game for the throw to Carson.
It wasn't the Falcons. But anyway, yeah. Maybe it was. Now that I think about it, maybe it was. But I mean, he got that ball out so early. I mean, he knew where he wanted to go with the football. He knew the spot he wanted to throw to, and he just put a nice trajectory and touch on it. I mean, he's really got a good feel now for this offense. What about his 3rd year being now with Brian Schottenheimer? So yeah. That's a big part of it too. Is when you have continuity within the system, it helps.
By the way, I would point out that Brian Schottenheimer, friend of the podcast, was on. He was on the podcast this offseason.
Shotty,
love Shotty.
Yeah.
And tell him I said hey this weekend. I don't let you up to that. I asked him. I was like, man, am I crazy, or do these pieces that you guys have assembled between Lockett and Metcalf and Phillip Dorsett, Greg Olsen, like all those receivers are really good on play action. Like they can get so deep, so quick on you that if you run play action successfully, or if you smell a blitz coming, you can go up top. Like Lockett, I mean, the 2 touchdown pass, I know the Cowboys secondary stinks, but like these guys have been running free. I mean, like even Metcalf had a couple steps on Stephon friggin' Gilmore in that game. I mean, like they get vertical.
Oh, the New England game. That's what I'm thinking of. We hit
maybe so.
Backfield, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they've all been they've been –
he's hit a lot of guys for touchdowns.
Hey, what did you think about the Gator roll from the Cowboys guy?
The Gator roll from what?
Did you see where he rolled Carson's ankle?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's tough because you'd like to think that kind of stuff doesn't happen. But, I don't know. I don't want to speak on it one way or another only because I've been a part of too many teams and heard too many things where, guys will do these little kind of dirty things here and there and then act like they were oblivious to it.
I feel like it's less prominent now because there's a billion people with phones or like screen.
It's not that. I just think you don't get the type of kids or guys coming into the league now that do that sort of thing. I mean, back in the day, there would be guys who played dirty like that.
Ndamukong Suh stepped on somebody's like face.
Yeah, I mean, Richie Incognito always got
Albert Hainsworth. I mean, like what?
And there were guys who would be like that. Like they wanted to get in your head mentally, and they wanted to do things and try to hit you or mess with you, so that you were more preoccupied with that instead of doing your job. That was like that mental warfare. That was how players used to play and how they used to be. I just don't see quite as many players who come into the league anymore who talk as much trash. Like it's kind of like the NBA. Like everyone's all buddies. They want to join teams to go win a championship. It's kind of like that now too. All these kids are recruited at the same level. They're kind of friendly with one another. there's really not quite as much like hatred towards one another. It's more love. And that's just drastically different than like 20 years ago, where, I don't want to talk to anyone from a rival team. I don't care. Like I wasn't going to hang out with them in the off season, or if I saw them somewhere in the same city in Vegas, like get out of here with that,
Ironically, you now do a pregame show with Reggie Bush and Matt Leiter.
But it's not like it's always friendly either. Right? I mean, we sometimes have to put on a nice face, but there's definitely some debates and some arguments in there.
By the way, DK Metcalf through 3 games, averaging 24.8 yards per catch.
Yeah.
That is insane. I was just looking up T.O. I mean, you forget that T.O. didn't even really explode until his 3rd year with San Francisco.
I was going to say, if you actually compare Metcalf's rookie year to T.O.'s 2nd year, they're pretty comparable when you actually look at the stats of those two. If you want to check that out,
that was the comp I was looking for. Yeah, 58 catches, 900 yards, 7 touchdowns, 15.5 yards per reception for a 22-year-old Metcalf. And then T.O. in his 2nd year, 60 catches, 936 yards, 8 touchdowns, 15.6 yards per catch for a 24-year-old T.O. Good call.
Yeah, so I don't think T.O. played his whole entire rookie year, if I'm not mistaken, too.
Yeah, he only started 10 games for the 4 years.
Yeah. So
look, T.O. It's pretty crazy that like you're like, but Metcalf's bigger because T.O. was huge,
He's not. Yeah, I was gonna say he's not that much bigger. Like if you couldn't you picture DK Metcalf like out in front of his house doing sit-ups and like talking to the media? We've seen him with the shirt off enough times. Like very similar, I think, to T.O.
All right, I like it. Aaron Rodgers. Hey, I took one on the chin for this, and I'm fine with it. Like, you're not going to be right all the time in this business, and I was dead ass wrong on Aaron Rodgers. He's looked awesome this season. In fact, I have for some reason an alert that just popped up on my thing for my apologies to Aaron Rodgers, the column that I wrote on Monday. And you know what? I'm sorry. I was wrong. The 2nd year in this offense, they have designed these play action looks to be identical to their run game. And it's similar to what Kyle Shanahan wants to do in San Francisco. Rodgers is slinging the deep ball. What? That's what they did.
I'm laughing only because, it doesn't matter if it's Kyle Shanahan's offense.
Everybody's trying to do it, but I'm saying, obviously you want play action to look like
you want it to mimic what you're doing of the running game, yeah.
But I'm saying, you see that with Kyle Shanahan where they have they have all the pre-snap motion and all that is designed to throw the defenses off, and then you have the flow look like, and then you come back the other way. I get that's what football is, Brady. I'm not a moron.
Well, it's what the misconception I think is with motions and shifts and all that is you're really trying to gather information, and then once you figure out what front based on the personnel you're using, because they're going to try to match your personnel, then you're utilizing those shifts to get to a formation where you have angles in the running game. Or you're utilizing motion to get leverage, right? Because that's what defense lives based upon, is holding their leverage. So that's really what you're trying to do or attempting to do. And when you run a lot of the misdirections, or when you're running the football and then running a boot off of it, you're trying to break their leverage, right? You're trying to break contain on either side of that, either the outside run, the outside zone, or on the boot. So that's more of the goal of it, is you're trying to break all their principles and everything that the defense abides by. And you're doing that with looks that guarantee you the type of fronts and the type of box counts that you're trying to run against or potentially throw the football against.
Well, and you're going to find out pretty quickly whether they're playing, the defense is playing man or zone. I mean, if you're running somebody across the middle, there's no one following, and then presumably it's zone. I realize you can disguise that different ways as well with the coverages.
Well, and then you could still play like some teams play. That's when you do your due diligence, if you will, on preparing for a game. Some teams will actually run the corner over and they'll play zone out of that. You just have to understand during your week of prep, are they one of those teams that's going to do that? There's some teams that, usually when you're base personnel and you get in an I formation, right? And you motion your Z across to go to an I right slot. If that cornerback runs with them, you typically are saying man, but that's not always the case. Some teams will still play cover 2 out of that. They'll play, 2 slot, depending on the system and what you call it. But those are just things that you try to learn about based on your studying.
Well, for example, the 2 plays to Allen Lazard down the field, it felt like those were entirely set up on the Packers' ability to run the football and be physical in that run game. And then that New Orleans is sort of selling out a bit, and you can get the guys to bite on the play action. They come in and you go up top. But, the plays looked identical to what they were running. And but it feels like Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers are on the same page. And this is what bugs me about it. I mentioned on Monday's show. I hammered the idea of consistency at the quarterback position, OC, offensive line, head coach. And then I ignored that with the Packers, and that was stupid.
Well, look, it's not, dude, everyone's guilty of it, right? Like, I think I'm even guilty of them not doing enough in the offseason to provide him with enough weapons. But they internally obviously felt great about what they had on their roster, whether it's Sternberger's growth or Tanyan at the tight end spots, or looking at Valdez-Scantling and how him and Allen Lazard would continue to grow from last year. So I actually think it's brilliant because, much like you, the one thing we all kept talking about with every team was continuity. And we kind of, for whatever reason, just thought this was a team that was like devoid of talent, or they wouldn't be better off, with the guys they currently have in the roster. So I think a lot of us were dead wrong in that respect. I think what we didn't foresee happening is how big of an advantage the cadence has. And when you look at how Aaron Rodgers uses it, it completely nullifies the pass rush, and not having that crowd in the Superdome really provided an advantage for, I think, Aaron Rodgers, but also I think away teams when you go in there now.
Yeah, and Aaron Rodgers, that means he's going to have an advantage in situations with no fans. And by the way, there will be no fans in Buffalo moving forward. The Bills announced that, which means there won't be dildos flying on the field when Josh Allen goes flying into the end zone.
By the way, like even places where there are fans, it's not enough. They're wearing face coverings, they're spread out. Like, it really doesn't play an impact on it. I mean, I called a game this past week. They had like 500 or 700, I think, family and friends that came out. There was actually a nip slip, which was actually pretty funny on the Jumbotron. Yeah, there was a chick who was down there, and like they were playing some music, and she like had a crop top on, and she picked her hands up, like throw her hands up, and she clearly wasn't wearing
a
bra.
Lift it up. It was just a slip.
I mean, it was like a lift shirt came up, and everyone's like, "Oh!" And I remember like we were during a break, and I was like, "Oh!" And one of my camera guys made mention of it, but she was fairly embarrassed. She left probably to go to the concession or something for a while, but she did eventually come back in the stadium.
Yeah. It's not like you could hide in the crowd either.
No. Yeah. She was spaced out, and you knew who it was, but she wasn't as excited as she displayed earlier in the game.
What do you make of Josh Allen and what we've seen from him so far? Is this the leap he's taking? Should we expect a little comeback to earth? What do you think?
No, I think this is a leap he's taking. I think this is just how good this offense can operate and be. My biggest concern with him is he like, I understand he's physical, he's athletic, he wants to extend plays and all that, but he really does take some unnecessary hits. I think my concern for him is he's going to miss a game or two this year. If he keeps, trying to hold on to the football at times and fight off Aaron Donald or any other defensive lineman. It's like, dude, just live the play the next down. Like, you're the guy. You don't have to look over your shoulder. It's important that you live the play that next down, that next series. And there's times when I know he wants to continue to keep fighting for it, but that's not going to bode well for their entire team if he goes out with a separated shoulder. So that's my only concern, honestly, with how they're operating right now. And I think last week was like a big step for him. Your team has been pretty dominant. You're down. You lead them down the field, and we can talk about a questionable pass interference call. But if you're a Rams fan, I have no idea how you can say anything based on how week one went with Michael Gallup and that bad OPI call, and then obviously the NFC Championship game from a couple of years ago.
You mentioned the Rams. Jared Goff has actually been much better this season. Sean McVay feels like they reworked the offense, not reworked the. They've got the offensive line play has been substantially better. That's a huge deal. He's not stuck in third and long, and he's able to use his play action. Do you think he's actually has taken a step forward, or is this more like they improved everything around him?
I think it's both. I mean, I think he's taken a little step forward, but I also think it's like been a concentration on like Robert Woods. Now you're starting to see how good he is, and obviously some of the other pieces too. Cooper Kupp falls in line with that, but I think Van Jefferson's going to be a star too once he continues to get more reps, more touches. But you hit the nail on the head. It's their offensive line. Like, he's just not as good of a quarterback if they can't do the things that they're doing right now, whether it's the play action, the boots, or even providing somewhat of balance with the run game. We saw that last year. Like, when they struggled, their offensive line was getting beat up. I think Whitworth's playing better this year. I think there's a number of guys up front who've done a better job. So to me, this team and this offense really kind of goes with its offensive line play. I'm still a huge believer in that being one of the biggest differences, with some of the teams right now that had like a lot of adjustments to make on the O-line. When their O-line struggles, they struggle. They didn't have much of an offseason to really develop and gel together. So I think the ones that either had continuity or have been able to play well so far this year, those are the offenses that typically have performed extremely well.
The Rams, by the way, dead last in pass rate on first and second down. They're just running the ball, and they're running it effectively. Darrell Henderson is freaking awesome.
He's a good player.
Yeah.
I'm still excited about Cam Akers, though. I know he's been a little banged up, but He's
I think
he's a solid player.
I agree. Let's get to the bad. Oh, you can't start. I mean, man, I tell you what, rough season for Dan Orlovsky so far. The publicly just pounding the table, former Lions quarterback, now with ESPN, publicly pounding the table for Eagles quarterback Carson Wentz to take a huge leap forward. And Debo wants to know. Oh no, I'm sorry. Eric D. From Philly wants to know. This is a mailbag question. How can a QB regress this much? Why does God hate my team?
I mean, look, they're sustained injuries. That's part of it when you have difference makers. And I know everyone wants to make a big deal about how he played last year, especially when they were, void of talent at the wide receiver position. But it's hard to continually do that in the NFL. So that plays a role. Their offensive line's been banged up. They haven't been as good either. I don't think he has a ton of help in the run game. So it's a product of all that. But he's pressed. He's forced some things too and made some really poor decisions. And I don't know how good Doug Peterson's play calling is. Now, granted, it's hard to be confident in some of your play calls when you don't have everyone else out there, or you're not even sure what's going to work. Which I do think it's fair to question everything at this point based on how they've looked. But this is a team that I honestly I pegged them as a 7-9 football team this year. I know even with all their additions, I think people had high hopes for them. I just kind of saw it a little bit different. I think what was good, their defensive front, you kind of figured that coming into it. Still had questions about the secondary. And as good as I think they looked coming into the season with all these new pieces, I just thought, after losing Dillard, how's that going to affect their O-line? They already were limping into the season anyway. So unfortunately, I think all those things have kind of added up to impact Wentz's play. But, I think he's pressing a little bit too. And there's a guy who played on Monday Night Football, former MVP, that he looked like he was pressing the other night, even though he's had a pretty good year up to that point. Yeah,
Lamar Jackson. That was bad, man. By the way, Carson Wentz, if he has to throw in his career, he's over 40 passes, so 41 passes or more. He's had it happen 20 times, and he has won exactly, I believe, 3 of those games. No, excuse me, 4 of those games.
I think there's only 2 quarterbacks when you throw the football over probably 40 times. Right. Who actually have winning records, by the way.
Nobody does. That means if you've thrown it 40 times or more, that means you're probably losing. But he's thrown it 42, 43, and 47. And I think the concerning thing is that in week 1, they had a 17-0 lead.
Yeah.
In week 2, he made a horrible throw. That was the interception in the end zone. I mean, come on, man. You gotta know that safety, even if he's a little out of position.
But didn't they say he's got a little Brett Favre in him? You gotta kind of take the good with the bad, right? I mean, and Brett was one of those players where he would throw 3 incredible touchdown passes, and then you see 2 picks, and you're like, why did he throw that? So I guess you got to take with the good with the bad, and right now it's just been more bad than good.
Yeah. So Lamar, you mentioned him. Awful game on Monday night.
Yeah.
You
know what it is, Will? It's getting to the point where I think we expected him to develop, more and more and more as a pocket passer, and the only times you're really tested with that are when you're down and when you're in a must-pass situation. And I just think we've seen time and time again him struggle to be able to consistently do that when they're down big in games, and especially versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I think in his starting career, that's basically outside of what the Titans, the only other team he's really lost to.
0-3. He's 0-3 against the Chiefs.
And so, at this point, I don't know if it's mental in the sense that, when you're playing against Patrick Mahomes, and I felt this way playing against Favre, playing against Manning. You look across the sideline, you're like, crap. If I don't score points, if I don't take care of the football, if I'm not perfect, I don't know that we're good enough to have a chance to win. And that's the trap you fall into because you're not playing them. You're playing that defense. And especially when they have a good defense, then it's incredibly difficult, for you to play perfect and win a football game. But I think that's when you start pressing. That's when you make mistakes. That's when you find yourself moving faster through progressions or just are a little bit off on throws. Now, it's not all on him. I mean, Marquise Brown didn't drop the ball. Andrews, too. He was a part of that. I didn't like the way Greg Roman called the game.
Awful. Greg Roman had a really good run in Baltimore. That's probably his worst game he's called yet.
Well, outside of their playoff game versus Tennessee, because the common denominator was they kind of flipped the script like what Seattle's doing. They tried to throw earlier in downs, got away from the run game. And it's like, dude, your rushing attack will get you chunks of 10, 20-yard runs. You don't have to get away from it. It's probably just as explosive or just as successful if you're running a design quarterback run.
They had first first and 3 or like first and goal at whatever it was. They were down in the red zone like that on running plays, and then decided to try and pass it 3 times, and all of a sudden then he kicked the field goal. It was very
well, yeah, the opening, and then it was funny. Like the opening drive of that game, I was thinking to myself, man, you kind of got to go for it here, right? Like I know you got down there easy, but I just got the sense that like this is gonna be a high scoring game. Maybe you set the tone and you go for it on 4th down, but they didn't, and the rest was kind of history. Like that was, outside of, and by the way, and then the kickoff return, like as good as that is for the team and for scoring and like momentum, you also as a quarterback are like, oh, well, now I've got to wait until I get my turn again in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Like you're sitting on the sidelines waiting. It's hard to get into a rhythm.
You sort of wanted – it was almost like, oh, I mean, that's great for the score. It is great, but like you kind of want Lamar to get back out there and be able to answer.
Oh, dude, I can promise you. Like I think about the times where you'd have a good return. Like you want good field position, but
don't get in the end zone.
Yeah, you don't want to be in the end zone. Like you want to be plus territory. So I know my OC is going to call a shot at some point, either first down, 1st and 10, P and 10, or maybe it's like 2nd and 5 or something like that. Let's take a shot and try to get one in the end zone. Like I want that to happen. I don't want the guy to return it all the way where I don't get to touch the ball at all.
Right. No, that's true. I didn't really think about that. And Lamar, that throw he missed to Marquise Brown on the sideline is just. And then you got to hit like any air on that whatsoever. Marquise Brown had one where he didn't lay out like on the deep sideline, and so you felt like he just kind of got in his head.
The early ones they showed, it went right through his hands. I mean, those are the things that, they need him to step up and play better. I thought Bozeman's played well this year. He struggled, though. Chris Jones had a big game. Skur hasn't been as good as what they had, previously. But, it's just I don't know. I look at, like, his lack of growth as a pocket passer, and, you just question it because they're a playoff team. They're one of the best teams in the AFC, but I think we've seen this story before. It's more about, all right, well, what can they do once they get to the playoffs? And that's the problem is they've had to play from behind versus the Titans. You've had to play from behind versus the Chiefs, and they just don't have that ability to consistently be in a pass mode and be able to win football games.
I thought it was a really interesting quote, and I was sort of surprised it even made it. But they asked Patrick Mahomes about Lamar Jackson and, like, going head-to-head. And he said maybe it's sort of – it was either before or after the game. I can't remember. He's like, maybe it's sort of like with me and Tom Brady. I was like, damn, like, that's like, I mean, he can't get past you, but, like that's a pretty big goal. I mean, Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. Like Patrick Mahomes showed up at the end of his career and then had to get past him. I understand there's a Jordan Bulls or like a Pistons Bulls thing maybe there, but to say that about someone who's your peer is a little bit different, Yeah.
No, I mean,
maybe not wrong, but just it's a little bit kind of like,
Yeah, no, I mean, here's the thing is, like, there's no doubt Patrick Mahomes is one of the greatest talents this league's ever seen, right? Like, so I think if anyone can get away with it, he probably can. And I think with the way that team looks right now, I don't know how you would bet against them the rest of the year. Like, I fell for it last week. I sat there and looked and I said 3.5, okay. Maybe Baltimore is going to be able to, do enough defensively. I think they have the personnel to play similar to how
they kept blitzing him. And I don't know why.
It's Don Martindale. Like that's his style. He wants to continue to be aggressive, and it's fine. But you got to play more press. Then you got to influence Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman and not allow those guys to get started. And I understand there's a risk with that, right? You get press man coverage, they could get blown by for a big play. But the reality is, they weren't forcing the football out really, and they were giving such a cushion that is easy living for Patrick Mahomes to have an 8-yard cushion on the outside and let those guys with speed push those cornerbacks into a back pedal and have all that room to be able to complete a football.
Yeah, and then worst case scenario, the cornerbacks cover and you get like Travis Kelce sauntering underneath in wide open spaces. All right, we'll get through these other guys quickly. Some younger quarterbacks are struggling as well. Sam Darnold, man.
I mean, look, they're O-line. There's no one to throw to. Like, this is the classic case of, a quarterback drafted into just a bad situation circumstance. Like, when you want to start evaluating, like I remember, we were talking earlier today on radio about, Brian Billick's book, The Q Factor or some crap. I'm like, dude, listen, like every player is probably a 50-50 shot in the first round, but if you put them in a good situation circumstance, it'll probably work out. Like they'll probably be there for a while. They'll probably be more successful. Look at the guys right now that are young that we view as being most successful. They all have continuity within their system. In some of the cases, if you're talking about like Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, or Tom Brady, or even, I mean, no matter who you want to throw in that conversation, like they sat for a little bit. They watched the guy who was either a future Hall of Famer or a Pro Bowl caliber player, and then they went in and played. And they've had continuity in the system, and they've been able to play, basically on a talented team that's able to be competitive every year. So I feel like for him, Daniel Jones is the other quarterback that kind of falls in that category right now. It's tough living, man, when you are born into the NFL and you have nothing around you that gives you any feeling of stability.
Well, so I was saying this about on the radio the other day about Josh Allen versus Sam Darnold. So when Josh Allen, Brandon Beane, and I agree 100% with your statement. Like I was just sort of looking at who was drafted in and around when you went to the Browns.
Yeah.
Like if you had been drafted in 2008 by the Ravens instead at the 18th overall pick, like I think your career, like, you know what I mean? Like your career is probably drastically different because Joe Flacco didn't have to go in and do everything for that team. He was put into the perfect situation with a great franchise that put a great, you know what I'm saying? Like that's
no,
what matters.
We actually talked about that. I used that exact example of someone who,
I didn't listen to your radio show, but I mean,
no, I know that's the funny thing is like, that's the example I used in talking about someone who was kind of, put in a situation where they had a great defense, good running game, stability there at the time with the coaching staff. And it ended up leading to him winning a Super Bowl, being the Super Bowl MVP. But I don't know that anyone was viewing him as, the whole question, is he elite? Like, right, people had to answer that forever because they really didn't know. And the reality is it doesn't matter when it's all said and done, but he's been able to make a lot of money in this league because he was born into a great situation and circumstance. The truth is, look, there's probably a handful of guys who can raise and elevate the level of people around them.
In the history of football, like
Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, right? Peyton Manning, those guys fall in that category. Drew Brees too, I think falls in that category. Outside of that, it's like there's not many others that don't need help out around them. An offensive line, guys to go catch, a defense to not have to have them score every time they go out. Like that's the reality. And it's like that in every realm you want to talk about in humanity. Like you have your uber talented people who can do that. And the rest, like they got to be in good situations and they got to be a little bit lucky. So that's the unfortunate part for Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. They're not transcendent talents like a Patrick Mahomes, and they're, were born into some bad situations.
Well, and I would even argue that, I mean, look, Drew Brees had some good years in New Orleans. I mean, in San Diego.
Yeah.
But it took him, it's like Carson Palmer getting to Arizona. Like sometimes it takes a good marriage of a coach and a situation and all that. And Drew Brees went 7-9 and led the league in passing 3 years in a row and needed a great defense to become a 13-win team. I mean, football is hard like that. The other one I would say too is like, I genuinely believe this, that if you flipped Patrick Mahomes and Mitchell Trubisky, that Mitchell Trubisky played for Andy Reid and got to sit for a year in Alex Smith's system, that he would be operating at a consistent, like Pro Bowl-ish level, and people would view him as close to a franchise quarterback. And Patrick Mahomes, if he had to go and start in his first year out of Texas Tech for John Fox's team, would end up he would be what we thought he was coming out, this like Favrean type of guy who makes huge plays but also makes some backbreaking mistakes, because he like getting a year to learn in Andy Reid's system behind Alex Smith helping you out is a massive difference.
It's huge. I mean, think about just what Trubisky kind of looks like and everything he's been through since then. Now he's benched. But that 100% plays a role in it. I think the biggest difference between those two, though, is, one, the talent just in general of Mahomes versus him, but also Mahomes played more games than Trubisky did. So a little bit different in that circumstance. But, yeah, I mean, look, the case study's Matt Moore. Matt Moore went in last year, when this Chiefs team. He's I believe they went 1-1 during his time, starting for them, but he put up some big stats. Like it was like, pretty much you can go in there and you've got a bunch of guys running around wide open. And I think this year they're even better. The way their O-line's playing with the rushing attack with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then all of their
Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
That's how I've always been heard. Or
I know Steve Levy was right. It was just I couldn't get it out of my head. It's like there's Helaire again. How about Patrick Mahomes' mom calling out Lou Riddick? That was kind of funny.
I didn't hear that.
She tweeted, "This announcer's calling my son Pat over and over again. It's driving me nuts." And they posted it on.
You know what's interesting? Like calling the Lions-Cardinals game, all of the Lions PR kept referring to Matthew Stafford. Right. And I was sitting there thinking, like, when did this change?
I think he's always been Matthew. It's like Phillip Rivers doesn't go by Phil.
Yeah, right. But I've kind of understood that. But like, I think I've called Matthew Matt. Like, just, hey man, what's up, Matt? What's up?
Oh, really? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Hey, Matt
I mean,
Stafford.
I've
I
never
don't know.
called Matthew Castle, Matthew. I call him Matt.
He's just Matt, though. Do you believe? Do you believe in the theory? And I think there's something to this, like a little bit of this, but like I think Joey Harrington, if he like when in the same Mitchell Trubisky, I think if Joey Harrington had changed his name to Joseph Harrington, maybe a little bit more success. Your thoughts?
I mean, should I have went by Braden? That's technically my real name.
No. Brady doesn't have the same. Like, I don't think of Brady and think of like a little, like I think of Joey and think of like, hi.
Oh, you're like a little kid. Like, hey, how you doing?
Hey, it's Joey.
Or like Pete Briscoe. You're like, hey, you know?
Yeah. Hi, it's Petey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, Pete, it's Pete here to play. Dwayne Haskins, last one.
It's just an uphill battle. Like, I mean, and one of the things I pointed out in calling their game a couple weeks ago versus the Cardinals is I just got a frustration for the way that game was called with Scott Turner, their OC. It just felt like he was still trying to figure it out. And I get it because outside of Terry McLaurin, like Logan Thomas hasn't continued to develop to be that real, tight end option. And they're devoid of talent. And so it's probably frustrating as a play caller, having a young quarterback who's not as consistent as you'd like him to be. Your offensive line play isn't great. And then you don't have a ton of guys who can separate and get open, right? You can draw whatever you want on paper. But if those guys can't go out and actually do it and separate and get open, it's hard to complete footballs and it's hard to get into a rhythm. So I just think that's going to be a really tough, difficult year. And it's, again, another scenario that's so hard to evaluate, in my opinion, because if you put that kid against every other quarterback in a T-shirt and shorts and you had him go out and have a throwing contest, let him hit targets, let him do whatever you want as far as quarterback drills, he would be right up there with the top. But the problem is when it comes to football, like, he only started 1 year in college.
Yeah.
He needs reps. He needs time. And I don't know that Ron Rivera or the Washington football team is going to be patient with him or patient enough. And I also think they're not factoring in the fact that their offensive coordinator is a young play caller in this league. And he's dealing with, I think, some of those growth pains too.
Yeah. And it's so, people like to talk about the most important thing in sport and football right now is having a quarterback on their rookie contract. You can't waste the rookie. It's really, look, like the Bills did it right. They went out and got some pieces and then dropped the quarterback in there and let him develop with the pieces they put around him and then supplemented it with more pieces and eventually add Stephon Diggs like a elite piece. The Jets drafted Darnold and then tried to throw a bunch of stuff around him and then threw the stuff away. And now they're going to have to decide, like, they might have to decide, do we draft Trevor Lawrence and trade? It's
probably going to be a new head coach and new general manager, so it's not going to matter at that point.
I think Joe Douglas sticks around.
I don't know. He came in with Gase. I mean, I just think that what you're seeing more often than not, and it sounds like that was Gase's pick to come in as general manager, is, you want this head coach and general manager to be aligned. So whoever that next guy is you identify, you want them to be on the same page. Like, I don't know if you want a holdover.
Well, I agree with you completely. You want them to come in together. The Jets, however, have operated for the last 15 years in a fashion that does not indicate they understand the importance of organizational cohesiveness.
No, it's true. And like I said, just from my time being there in 2013,
that's right.
It was very apparent John Idzik and Rex Ryan were not on the same page, as far as Geno Smith, and just remember the whole preseason with Mark Sanchez getting hurt and just walking into that scenario before week 1. I was like, this is going to be an interesting season because it feels like, Rex doesn't want Geno to start, but they're going to start him because they drafted him and Mark Sanchez is hurt anyway. And so it was interesting, but just the disconnect, I think, between, the coaching staff and the front office there was quite apparent just as a guy who was coming in there for about half the season for 8 weeks.
That'd be fun to sit around and watch. All right. You can watch us on the CBS Sports HQ. You're listening to this today on Wednesday morning, Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Myself, Brady Quinn, and Pete Briscoe will do picks for every single game in week 4. Brady, always a pleasure. Talk to you next week, buddy.
Sounds good.